does make you think, especially when you're playing games that are talking about alternative realities or alternative futures. It makes you think, okay, if we don't take care of our own environment, our own planet now, what is going to happen in the future?
The gaming industry is the most lucrative entertainment sector in the world. Its reach cuts through geography, generations, and demographics.
From an actual immersive standpoint, if you're a young person, you're kind of, you grow up in be a council estate, wherever it might be, somewhere where there's not particularly the most vibrancy, as I mentioned, like rainforests around you, that kind of stuff. There are game experiences now which kind of really try to give you that opportunity to experience something which is outside of what you see on a day-to-day basis,
These are the voices of different gamers from across the world. We've been asking them if they think video games really could make a difference in the fight against climate change.
The climate change issue is often discussed in really big terms of if we don't do it by 2040, by 2050, if we don't do these things, then these homes are going to be in the ocean. It's difficult to, as an individual, figure out how you'll have an impact on that. But the smaller things that these games are talking about with recycling and properly disposing of plastics and things, they're things that everyone can do. It's like watching a film or a TV show. You see characters that you relate to, that you see something of yourself and your life in, and if those things tackle environmental issues, you kind of feel those impacts in the things that you do in your own life.
The UN Environment Programme believes video games can be used to encourage billions of people to make greener choices. It's working with companies to explore how their games could address themes like reforestation and renewable energy.
A lot of them do address like a post-apocalyptic world, okay? So obviously like those are more like Armageddon. The traditional post-apocalypse is like zombies and the undead to a degree, so not necessarily climate change. But it definitely gives you an idea of like what the world would look like if things, on a social level as well, kind of capitulated. That you get this vibrancy of like if the world, if we stopped, kind of, if there wasn't as many of us, or we weren't kind of doing, kind of polluting the world as we are, then you see these beautiful, flourishing, kind of like vibrant landscapes with plants that are able to grow and animals running wild. So it kind of shows you that when we're not involved, there is like a future where those things do kind of flourish in a way.
I also play a lot of post-apocalyptic games, and the message around the environment and how we care for ourselves and what we do to the environment is really prevalent in those storylines, and it does get you thinking. And I think that it is a strong motivator for me to continue to be environmentally conscious.
Hello, I'm Player One, aka Anna Jones.
And I'm Player 2, also known as Katerina Vitozzi, and this week we're exploring how green video games could be.
And full transparency, Katerina, I'm not really in my comfort zone when we're talking about gaming because I've got very little experience and even less talent when it comes to the sport.
We've had this conversation sort of before we started recording where I thought, you know what, I've never played a game, I'm not a gamer. I actually broke up with someone who was a gamer because I was so cross at how much time they sat in front of a screen. They know who they are. But then I thought back actually to growing up, my brother and I, we used to play loads. We used to play, I remember, Street Fighter, we had an Atari, that's how old I am, where there was a game which was, gosh, it's amazing when you think about the lack of graphics, which was sort of 2 bars going horizontally, and it was, you would just like play tennis, but there were no players with tennis rackets. Do you remember it? Well, yeah. There you go, you're a gamer, Hannah, you're in the club. Welcome.
Finally.
But, yeah, Tetris on a Game Boy. Someone mentioned Donkey Kong yesterday, which I used to play all the time. So maybe I'm a vintage gamer. But not only is obviously gaming a chance for me to reminisce and Anna to feel somewhat deficient in her ability. Inadequate, yeah, that's the word I was going for. But apparently gaming could also be a tool for communicating the climate emergency and encouraging people to become more environmentally friendly.
Yeah, it's an interesting issue, this, about whether or not it could make a difference, couldn't it? And some might be raising a bit of an arched eyebrow at that because gaming itself, of course, is a high-intensive energy industry. It uses a lot of energy.
Yeah, and let's get some of those nitty-gritty numbers, shall we, and speak to our climate reporter, Victoria Seabrook, who's been working on this story. Victoria, thank you so much for joining us. Now, just how big is the gaming industry?
The gaming industry is enormous. I knew it was big, but I was quite surprised actually. So just in the UK, 44 million people play games.
What?
No.
So that's about 2/3 of our population.
Well, exactly. But bear in mind, it's not just people sitting down at a console or at a television. It's online and it's also on your phones.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah, of course. I suppose that's
Yeah.
true.
And then globally, that figure is 2.7 billion people. So that means that gaming reaches
goodness.
something like 1/3 of all people on the planet.
Wow.
Wow, so that's huge reach, isn't it? And I guess if you want to get a message over, that's going to go to a lot of people. But can it be a tool to fight climate change? Isn't that a bit of a stretch?
So there's a couple of ways that the gaming industry says that it's trying to go green or incorporate environmental and climate storylines and themes into their games. One way is the whole game, the whole premise is based on something climate or environmental related. So it might be set in a sort of dystopian, although realistic future where sea levels are rising and there's acid rain and so on. There's a game called Beyond Blue, which is all about a diver exploring the ocean, which is supposed to inspire a love of the ocean and help people understand it and want to protect it and so on. Games tend to simulate environments, and the problem with climate change, as I'm sure you both know from talking about it, is that sometimes it can be quite hard to communicate because it feels very distant and abstract. Whereas if you're simulating these environments, it can help people get their heads around what this scary future might actually look like.
The problem is, though, isn't it, that the gaming industry is part of the problem in that people use a huge amount of energy to play games, and there's a huge amount of energy used to make the equipment that you need.
Yes, of course. So just running the servers that stores the data uses a huge amount of energy. There was a study in the US that found that gaming uses 34 terawatt hours a year in energy usage, which didn't mean much to me, but that's the equivalent of 2.4% of the country's residential electricity use. And then there's also problems with things like e-waste from the games, the physical games themselves, which can be very difficult to recycle because there's a mishmash of materials in there. There's plastic packaging, and then there's also mining for some of the rare earth minerals that are used inside some of the games and the chips themselves.
So that does amount to quite a big carbon footprint, doesn't it? So what initiatives are there out there to try and encourage the industry to go green?
Well, the industry says that it is looking at various measures to try and measure and reduce its carbon footprint. This year it produced a Green Games Guide giving advice on reducing emissions, reducing plastics in places like packaging. One of the ways it's doing that is encouraging downloads, but then you've got the question of energy use if you're streaming. But it does admit that there's more to think about, and they're arranging a summit this year, and they also want to attend COP26, these climate talks, as an industry.
So let's hear from some of those video game creators about the action they're taking to fight climate change.
I just found a load of rubbish, so I'm going to pick that up. Put that in the bin. And then when you've picked up all the rubbish, you get a little love heart appear above the bin.
This is Jane Campbell. She's from Us2 Games. They've created a video game with an eco-friendly mission.
And there's lots of other bits of rubbish on the mountain as I'm climbing it.
The game's called Alba, and it's all about a young girl who explores an idyllic island which is threatened by the challenges of climate change.
So we're at some ruins. These ancient ruins are like very broken, fourth favourite ruins. You can hear lots of the animals. Wait, what's that noise?
And the player's job is to play as Alba to help protect the island.
Here we go. So that's all six of us, all six adults, picking up the dolphin on a lilo and just throwing him into the water. The dolphin's happy. Grandma says, "Viva! You and Inez saved the dolphin's life."
Well, Jane told us that as a direct result of creating Alba, their players have been more climate conscious.
What we've found and what we've heard from parents who have written in, or social media and lovely tweets that we've seen, is that parents are finding that their children are playing Alba and are actually actively being inspired to want to engage with nature afterwards. So, "Mummy, Daddy, please can I go out and do some bird watching this weekend? I want to go see the mallard duck that I've seen in Alba." Or mummy, daddy, is it okay if we go and do a beach cleanup? Like they've actually really, I guess, latched onto some of the activities that Alba does in the game and want to kind of replicate that in real life. So we are seeing, I guess, an organic kind of, relationship between what children are consuming in the game and versus how they can react that in the real world.
Well, yes, that's interesting, isn't it? Because, talking to psychologists, they might say that although messages within the game might really resonate, so people make different decisions, as soon as you step out of the game, it's difficult to know whether it'll have an impact on behaviour. That's anecdotal, some of the response that you've had, but do you really think that you can change minds with a game or change behaviour?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think something that we're still trying to quantify as well. Actually, with launching Alba, we also tried to launch a pledge campaign as well. So another sort of way that we wanted to kind of continue that journey of players taking action in the game. So let's say using less plastic. We had a pledge campaign which is called Count Us In, that we launched at the same time as Alba, which also has many steps that players could take to kind of reduce their use of plastic, to walk more and drive less. And we kind of wanted to be able to sort of aggregate an overall kind of impact that our players have been able to make through that inspiration of playing the game. But it is really difficult to translate action in the game into sort of quantifiable action outside of the game. But I guess the more people are seeing this kind of content in media, in games, in TV and film, the more it plays a more relevant part of their life. And I think the more that we talk about these themes, the more impact we'll organically see.
And do you think this is the way that, we're going to see studios and games take on more and more themes like this about environmental sustainability, about renewable energy, about climate change, as it becomes an issue that more and more young people feel passionate about?
Absolutely. And obviously a huge part of our audience is the younger generation. And we actually know from a study that was done earlier in the year that I think it's something like 66% of players actively are interested in playing games that have these themes in them. So there's definitely there's definitely rationale for players being interested in playing games with these themes. But I think the industry as well, the sector is really active in environmental protection. There's a lot of initiatives amongst the game industry in the UK and globally around trying to use our games as a platform for good, really.
Some people might say that sounds ironic, given that it's a hugely intensive energy using industry.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's a lot to be discovered around the kind of scope 3 carbon footprint of the game industry itself. Something we're all really acutely aware of. As I said, there's a lot of sort of alliance amongst the game industry around how we can do better with our carbon footprint. There's a lot of work going on at the moment to really deeply understand what is sort of carbon emissions of our users playing our games. So that's the biggest unknown at the moment, and that's the thing we're really trying to understand better, because of course the biggest footprint of the industry is people charging their phones to play their games, people turning on their TV, people powering up their consoles. So yes, I do agree with you. There's a lot of work to be done there, but I would say that what work the industry is doing, I think, is pretty inspiring, and we're doing more and more that we can to really try and address that going forward.
You speak about it very passionately, and I think with quite tenderly, actually. Was this something that felt important for you as a studio to work on, and why?
I mean, we are really passionate about Alba, and I think we're all really proud of what Alba has been able to achieve as well. Through launching Alba, we've always wanted to kind of take our players on a journey of this sort of action and taking action and creating impact in the game, but also being able to do that in the real world too. And what we was able to do was basically through a commitment that every copy of the game sold or downloaded, we committed to plant a tree in Alba's forest. And our goal is 1 million trees, and we're really close. We're at, I think, at 800,000 trees already in the forest, a little bit over. So yeah, we're super proud, as you say. You can hear it in my voice, but we're really proud of what we've been able to achieve so far.
And how far away are we from seeing an avatar of David Attenborough merging in one game in the future?
I think that's a huge possibility.
Could you imagine? Oh my goodness, it'd be amazing.
Well, what we're hoping is that Alba becomes the new Greta Thunberg. So, fingers crossed for Alba. We want her to be an icon.
So that's what video game creators are doing. But how much impact can fiction actually have on our reality?
Yeah, and can gaming really translate to long-term behavioural changes? And how do we prove that?
Yeah, there's been an increasing amount of research trying to evaluate how effective games are at changing people's behavior. And I think we have quite some evidence now to suggest that people do change their decision making and behavior within the game environment. And so I think there's some pretty good evidence on that.
Well, Sander van der Linden is a professor of social psychology in society at Cambridge University.
For example, there's a lot of games that help people try to save energy, for example, within the home, if you want to be more sustainable. And one of the more interesting ways, rather than asking people to self-report, have you saved, how much energy have you saved this week, which might also be difficult for people to assess and reflect on, is we can do other things, like we could have the energy in the building recorded where people live, if they consent to that.
Yeah, like measuring their smart meter, for example.
Yeah, measuring their smart meter, exactly. Or get the energy company to supply the data. And there are some studies which suggest that even when people leave the game, that there are some positive benefits in terms of real-world energy usage. But what you then see is that that's typically not sustained over a very long period of time, so that's kind of the downside. But there's always challenges that we can address.
What is it within the game that causes people to change their behaviour? Is it because the person creating the game says that this is the correct pattern of behaviour, and if you do it, you achieve it, you'll get a point or a bonus? Like, what is the actual mechanism that is changing behaviour?
There are a few powerful things about the psychology of gaming that are really interesting. And so one, it's a simulation engine. So one of the most important ways in which people learn throughout the developmental stages is through experience. And so we all know that we have an analytical capacity and we can think and reason logically, but most of the time we're not doing math, right? People find out it's hard to judge what peanut butter tastes like if you've never had it by the ingredient list. You just want to go ahead and taste it and see if you like it, right? And so that's how we learn about the world most of the time. Mark Twain famously said, "A man who carries a cat by the tail learns something he can learn in no other way." Obviously, no one should carry a cat by the tail. Unfortunate metaphor.
Don't try this at home.
Don't try this at home, yeah. But I think he gets the point across. Experience is a powerful teacher. And so what games can do is simulate experience for people. We can simulate the disastrous consequences of climate change. We can simulate floodings. So there's a whole sort of spectrum. And because experience is such a powerful teacher, it resonates with people much more than just telling them what the facts are. And within that environment, there are a few other cognitive benefits. So with the learning aspect comes that the way that our memories work is that they are built around associative networks, and so we link concepts to each other that we know. And so games help people retain content better because you can see it, you can interact with it, it links to other things that you know, and so people are more likely to remember content. You have the entertainment factor and the fun factor that helps with the experience of being more open to learning. And then there's the other benefit of games can play around with perspectives. And so you could take the perspective of somebody who's, let's say in a city that's flooding. There's lots of these unique ways in which games can interact with people, and really they're kind of a simulator of things. And then sometimes also outside of the game environment, but that's less clear. But one of the things you can do is you could re-engage people. So the way that you can design games, and game developers are good at this in clever ways, that ask people to return to the game environment over time, maybe the next level, the next badge, the next challenge, to keep re-engaging people so that you establish a more long-term connection between offline and online behavior.
So we know now that there are these games with specific climate change narratives or themes or landscapes. But perhaps I think games people are probably more familiar with are ones which are encouraging gamers, to shoot at targets, to steal cars, to be part of a sort of a war-themed scenario. So how do you distinguish between one type of content and behaviour and another? How can we say we don't want the behaviour learnt from the shoot 'em up games to spill over into reality, but we do want the nice and eco-friendly games to have an impact?
One trend that you're seeing now is that you can nudge people to be more sustainable within traditional games as well. So game developers could take initiative and say, look, you're playing Settlers of Catan, but now there's going to be a new scenario where we're going to give you extra points for being sustainable in the choices that you make when you take over an island or an army or something like that. And so even though that might sound kind of funny,
points for solar panels.
yeah, exactly. It might sound kind of funny. I'm going to shoot you, but I'm going to do it in a very sustainable way with wooden bullets.
Yeah, it'll be renewable.
So I can shoot you again. And so it sounds funny, but I think they can the people that come to social impact games and stuff, it's voluntary, it's opt-in, right? With other games, most, a lot of teenagers, a lot of young adults, lots of people play lots of games. So within traditional games, there are these interesting opportunities to nudge people. Maybe they're not even aware of it, right? Of being more sustainable within the games that they play.
I think we should probably apologise to parents who are now going to have their kids saying, I can have 10 more minutes on the console, Mum. I'm being environmentally conscious.
Yes,
and making
that's
green
true.
decisions. So there you have it. We link climate change to everything on this podcast. Gaming, football, donuts, you name it. We will make it work.
We do. And if you're wondering how on earth we've managed to link donuts to climate change or any of those other subjects, actually, you can scroll back and listen to all our previous podcasts. Please do. They are marvellous. They're available still wherever you get your podcasts from. So before you go and dig out your old PlayStation, Katerina, or whatever it was that you were using before, let's run through what's been making the headlines in the climate world this week.
Yeah, shall we talk about the wildfires in Europe to start with? Parts of Greece and Turkey over the past week have been battling with the most severe heat wave in decades. And that extreme heat has contributed to the most devastating wildfires. The pictures are absolutely heartbreaking. And although it's not unusual at this time of year in that part of the world to have some degree of wildfires, this year it's been particularly savage because of what's called a heat dome. So this is when there is this lid, if you like, of high pressure that traps heat under it, causing these unbelievably high temperatures, 47 degrees Celsius in some cases. Again, heat domes do happen, but what scientists have said that they will become more frequent, less predictable, and in areas where you wouldn't expect them as global temperatures rise as a result of climate change. And in Turkey, Greece and Italy, we've seen just how catastrophic they can be, with out of control fires, lives lost, homes destroyed, and people evacuated to try and escape.
The pictures have just been devastating, haven't they? In those regions, we just feel for everybody caught up in them. Meanwhile, Katerina, closer to home, a bit of political rivalry around wind farms.
Yeah, so the opposition Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has been criticising the Prime Minister's climate change plans. He's called them a cabaret of sound bites, and he's made these comments in a particularly apt place, really, Scotland, where later this year, of course, the UK government will be hosting the UN Climate Change Conference, COP26, where there is this row brewing over whether there should be more investment in wind farms, but really, on the counterbalance side, over a new oil field. Of course, on one hand, you've got the government saying that they will be aiming to reduce fossil fuel production, and on the other, you've got the development of sites like this, which are still awaiting final go-ahead. So, which way will the government fall? Whichever way it does, Keir Starmer says there needs to be a much clearer plan. So we're going to hear from him shortly. But after him, we're also going to hear from the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who is also in Scotland to try and sort of pin the Conservatives' green sail to the mast.
We need a strategic plan to enable us to transition, whether that's cars, whether it's energy, whether it's wind turbines, here in Scotland, hugely important, a strategic plan. And what we've seen from the SNP here and from the UK government is lots of targets, lots of ambitions, not matched by reality.
We can do every home in the country with clean, green power by 2030 from wind power alone. We're the biggest offshore generator of wind power already in the world, and you can see that the potential is vast.
Well, that's all for this week's episode of Sky News Climate Cast with me, Anna Jones.
And me, Katerina Vitozzi, and this episode was produced by Emma Ray Woodhouse. You can also read Victoria's full report on how we can make gaming greener on our website skynews.com/climate.
Plus, you can get plenty of other climate news every weekday on The Daily Climate Show. As always, do remember to like, rate and subscribe so you never forget about us. And see you next week. Bye.
Cheerio.